Welcome to the second video of the series Functions in JavaScript. In the last video, we learned about the benefits of functions, how functions make our code modular, easy to maintain, reusable, and readable. Now let's take a moment to appreciate our progress. And so far, we have successfully learned to write a function and grasp the concept of parameters, arguments, and return statements. Now, as we have observed in the last video, we can call a function with fewer or more arguments than it expects. And in either case, the function executes without any problem. Now, in case of fewer arguments, we know parameter gets a value of undefined or a default value if it's specified. But when we call a function with more number of arguments, where do these extra arguments go? So when we execute a function, JavaScript automatically assigns a built-in object which is an argument object. This special feature allows us to handle any number of arguments passed to a function. Now it is an array-like object. We can access any of the arguments passed using an index. It is accessible within a function, and when we call a function with a different set of arguments, the argument object reflects the new values. Let's have a look at the code now. I write a function test that accepts no parameters and call this function with 6 arguments. The first statement of the function prints the argument object and it shows all the arguments passed to the function. The second statement prints the second argument passed to this function. Now I change the function to accept one parameter. Now the first parameter is assigned the value this, but the argument object will still have all the arguments passed to the function. Before I conclude, I mentioned that arguments object is an array-like object. So which means that it is not an instance of array and it does not have methods like push, pop, and filter. However, it has a length property and allows to access its elements using indexes. Now we will cover scope and closure. Now, understanding this concept is very important as it helps write clean, efficient, and maintainable code. And this has a significant effect on our programming skills and the quality of the code we write. We start with some code. So I declare a few variables x1 to x4 and assign values to them. Now, and I use different keywords like let, const, and var to declare these variables. And I have used no keyword while declaring the last variable. Now I declare a function, I call it test scope, and again declare the 4 variables in a similar style as I mentioned above. And finally I defined a block within this function and again declare the 4 variables. The last statement in the block is to show these variables. It's a console.log statement, and I copy paste this statement outside the block as well. Finally, I execute the function and paste the statement, the console.log statement, to show these values. Now, before you continue with the video, I suggest you to pause this video and guess the output of each console.log statement and write down which variable values these console.log statements will print and which values will not be printed, or this console.log statement will throw an error. Let's debug this code and see how these variables are scoped. So I set a breakpoint on the first statement and start debugging. So when we look at the variables, we see local and the global scope. When you look at the local scope, you will observe that the variables have already been declared but not defined, and this applies to x1, x2, and x3. But what about the x4? So even if we look under the global section, it is not declared. So as we execute the code, the variables are defined and the x4 variable is defined under the global section. Now to summarize at this point, the local scope you see here, it refers to the scope of the script we are executing. Node.js provides a global scope and the script executes within this global scope, which is available through this object. Now, variables declared using a keyword are hoisted. So when we say hoisted, it means that we can see the declaration and access the variables. The value of these variables is undefined until the variable is defined in the code. and the variables declared without using any keyword are not hoisted. Now we start with the executing the function test scope. Now you see that under the variables we have new entries, local test scope and closure. The test scope defines the function's context and hoists the variables with a function level scope. These are y1, y2 and y3. You will note that the variable z3, though it is declared within a block, is available under the function level scope. And when we execute the function code, the variables y1, y2 and y3 get initialized and y4 is initialized under the global scope. As we execute the block code where we define the variable z1, you will notice a block scope appears under the variable section. Now a block is defined within curly braces and it is most commonly used with the control flow statements like if and for. And it is also used as a standalone section the way we have defined in our function. And when we execute the code, the variables z1 and z2 are initialized under the block scope, z3 is initialized under the function scope, and z4 is defined as a global variable. The closure is a feature JavaScript provides which is created when a new function is defined. Now this closure allows a function, in our case this test scope, to access variables created at the script level. There is more to this concept which we will learn about in upcoming videos. Now coming back to the execution of the console.log statements, the first console.log statement will show the values of all the variables, as all the values are available at the block level. Now for the second console.log statement, which is written at the function level. Here the variables x1, x2 and x3 are part of the closure, which means they are available at the script level, and x4 is available at the global level. So it will print the value of these four variables. Now coming to the next set of variables, which is y1, y2 and y3. These are declared at the function level and y4 is declared at the global level. So all these four variables will also be available during the console.log execution. And now we come to the last set of the variables which were declared at the block level. Since the scope of the block is over, the variables z1 and z2 will not be available. The z3 has been declared at the function level, so it will be available, and the z4 is again declared as a global variable. Let's see the execution now. You will notice an error stating z1 is not defined. Now we will remove this variable from the console.log statement and execute the code again. Now the error is for another variable z2. This too had a block level scope, hence it is not available at this point of time. We remove this as well and execute the code again. And this time the code executes without any error. Now coming to the last console.log statement, which is defined at the script level. As you notice, the variables x1, x2 and x3 are defined at the local level, and x4, y4 and z4 are available at the global level. The variables y1, y2, y3 and z3 were defined at the function level, and the z1 and z2 were defined at the block level within the function. Now since we are out of the function scope, all of these variables are not available, and when we execute the final console.log statement, JavaScript will throw error for these variables which are out of scope as of now. Let's execute the final console.log statement and see the result. As you can see, JavaScript throws an error stating y1 is not defined. Now we remove this variable from the console.log statement and execute the statement one more time. Now we get the same error for y2. We remove this as well from the console.log statement and execute it one more time. Same error again, y3 not defined. We will get the same error for three more variables, z1, z2 and z3, because all of these variables are out of scope as of now. And when we remove all of these variables, the statement will execute properly. To summarize, x1, x2 and x3 have a script level scope. x4 has a global scope. And y1, y2, y3 and z3 have a function level scope. z1 and z2 have a block level scope, and y4 and z4 have a global scope. Now we will learn about function expression. It is another way to define a function, and we assign the function to a variable. Let's examine the syntax of creating a function expression, which is also known as anonymous function. So we assign the function to a variable, and just like any normal function declaration, this too accepts optional parameters and can have optional return statement. And when I have to use this function, I execute it using the variable name, just like a normal function name. If I do not assign this function to a variable, I cannot use it. Regarding the scope of the variables, a function expression behaves the same as a function declaration. Let's understand the difference between a function declaration and function expression. When it comes to syntax, for function declaration, mentioning a function name is mandatory and it is part of a syntax. Now for function expression, storing the function definition in a variable name is optional, and in case we wish to use the function later in the program, we should store the function definition in a variable. Otherwise, the function is defined as an anonymous function. Now when it comes to hoisting, with function declaration, a function name is hoisted. It means it is possible to call a function before it is defined. And in the case of function expression, a function name is not hoisted. It is not possible to call a function before it is defined. When it comes to the scope, both function types are very similar. So they both create their own scope. The variables defined in the function are accessible within the function. Now the difference is, for the function declaration, a function is available in the scope in which it is created, and for a function expression, a function is available only after a function is assigned to a variable. When it comes to the usage, a function declaration is suitable when a function is required in the entire scope of the execution, and a function expression is suitable when a function is required on a need basis and for limited scope. With this, I wrap up the video, and let's summarize what we have learned in this video. Thank you for watching this video. If this video has helped you, please like it. If you think this can help any of your friends, do share it. And finally, Do subscribe so that you don't miss any other videos in future. Thank you very much. Keep learning.